I would like to welcome you at the opening of the Festival of Free Culture, Creative Commons Salon, Belgrade. I'm not going to talk much. In December, we just introduced Creative Commons licenses in Serbia, and we became a 43rd jurisdiction using these licenses worldwide. This is the website of Creative Commons Serbia. You can find the address creativecommons.org.eu. There you can see the program, you can see a lot of very interesting production developed using Creative Commons licenses, and I would like to welcome you all in 8:30 tonight in Cinema Rex, where a lot of current Creative Commons licensed production will be shown. In the meantime, we saw some major publications like the History of Conceptual Art by Miško Šuvaković, like the Introduction to Architecture by Ivan Kucina. Another institutional product would be a movie by Museum of Contemporary Art Belgrade. Then again, and like usual, artistic and activistic production started really to use Creative Commons licenses, so we will present a lot of publications, websites, and art pieces, artworks, even the kind of artworks which was always controversial and tricky to be licensed in any way, like sculptures. And after that we're going to have a live performance on which we're going to present live some of the music which is going to be published. Today is the release date of the first electronic music compilation in Serbia using Creative Commons licenses. Help yourself, it's on the table behind you. And now we have a series of guests here. The first guest I would like to present is Ronaldo Lemos, coming from Brazil. Ronaldo is originally a lawyer, but a different kind of lawyer. I don't think Ronaldo needs much of the introduction, so I will just let Ronaldo speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lily. First thing to say is that I'm very happy to be in Belgrade. For a long time I wanted to be here, and I had to wait a lot, but finally I'm here. And it's very good to be among friends, and it's very good to have our Brazilian ambassador also in the crowd. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, so my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the production of culture in developing countries with a focus in Brazil, but pretty much of what I'm going to say can be also applied to the majority of the other countries. So my presentation will be divided into 6 parts, and the first part I'd like to talk a little bit about the structural changes that the cultural industry is facing, certainly in Brazil, but also in most of the other countries. So just to give you an idea, if you think about the music industry in Brazil, you see that the number of physical sales, so CDs and DVDs, in the past 5 years have been dropping significantly year by year. This is very usual. You will also be able to see this in many other countries. This is true for the UK, this is true for the US, and it's even more true for developing countries and countries like Brazil. If you take a look at the largest record label in Brazil, which is Sony BMG, you will notice that in the past year, 2007, Sony BMG only released 13 CDs of Brazilian music. So you have the largest record label in Brazil releasing only 13 CDs. Everybody knows that Brazil is a very musical country. So what you can basically see from that is that the traditional industry is just not working as an appropriate channel to disseminate what's being produced in Brazil in terms of culture. If you take a look at the newspapers, the situation is not really different. This is the largest newspaper in Brazil. It's called Folha de São Paulo. And basically, if you take a look in the past 5 years, the daily circulation rates for the largest newspaper in Brazil is also dropping. And once again, this is true for Brazil. This is very true for most of the developing countries, and it's true also for the UK, the US, and other countries. If you take a look at books, then it's a very interesting situation, because books generally go through these changes pretty much on a flat rate. It doesn't get more or less. But in Brazil, it actually got less. So it's very hard to find numbers about the Brazilian publishing market in Brazil. But the numbers that we got also demonstrate that the number of physical units of books that have been published in the country are also dropping. And that's very interesting because that contrasts with other countries in which books maintain pretty much the same, even with digital technology. And finally, if you take a look at the movie industry in a country like Brazil, I think it probably is well known for everyone in this audience that Hollywood actually has a market share of 85% of the global market. That means that at any time in the year, more than 8 movie screens will be screening Hollywood movies anytime in the year. And in Brazil, this 85% market share is precisely accurate. Brazil is 85% in terms of share, so every year you would have like 352 films being launched in Brazil. Only 51 of them would be Brazilian films. And if you take a look at the box office at one random year in Brazil, like for instance 2005, you will see that the top 5 box office is Hollywood movies. There are no Brazilian movies being watched among the top 5 or sometimes top 10, with a few exceptions. Like last year, we had one film that made more than 1 million. We had 2 films that made more than 1 million in terms of audience, but it's pretty much 85% belongs to Hollywood and to the American industry. But if you take a look at the economic results of this market, you will see that there is a significant trend of drop. This is a graphic that goes back to the 70s in Brazil, in which you had a golden period for the Brazilian films, and then you have a tendency of drop that actually continued in the past 2 years. The data only goes up to 2005, but the previous 2 years is just the same. And if you take a look at the revenues, it's the same thing. You have like a peak in the 70s, and then a significant trend of dropping in the past few years. So what is going on? I think the important thing with these numbers is to demonstrate that there is a transformation going on. This transformation means competition with other media, like the internet or even other channels for distribution, but it also demonstrates that there is a more profound transformation going on in terms of how to distribute and produce culture. And that takes me to the second part of my presentation, which is the fact that something new has emerged. Something that we can call the collaborative culture or the decentralized production of culture. So it's very interesting because at the same time, and for the same reasons that the traditional industry goes under a crisis, something else emerges, something that is new, something that has not any sort of precedent in history in the way that is happening right now, which is the fact that culture becomes, culture and information and knowledge, to be precise, becomes produced on a collaborative manner. So this phenomenon has been given many names. One is this nickname, which is Web 2.0. Some people don't like this nickname. I don't like it very much. But it's one way of referring to what's going on. So what I would like to call your attention is that this collaborative culture is getting to the developing countries. It's not a phenomenon taking place only in Europe or in the US. It's getting to Brazil. So for instance, this is the Wikipedia page for Donald Rumsfeld. And it's interesting because for some reason I ended up checking this page, in the very day in which Donald Rumsfeld had resigned, and someone in Brazil had updated the page in Portuguese. That demonstrates a lot of things. For instance, that Brazilians have a lot of free time to spare. And besides that, it demonstrates that there are people willing to contribute, for instance, with updating the page of Donald Rumsfeld in Portuguese in the Brazilian Wikipedia. So that's kind of interesting to realize. And the other thing is, the rule would be as follows. Give me a traditional industry and I will show you a more or less developed new collaborative form of industry. So for instance, if you take a look at the music industry, this is a French website called Jamendo, in which the business model is completely different. Everything is licensed under Creative Commons, everything is online, and that's an alternative. But if you go to Brazil, you have the Brazilian version of it, which is this website called Trama Virtual. And it's interesting because I told you that Sony BMG is releasing 13 CDs per year. This website has around 30,000 artists and more than 120,000 phonorecords available online and for free. So at the same time that you have the traditional industry struggling to release new things, if you go to a site like this, you'll be able to find 30,000 new artists, contemporary artists, with everything online for free. Many new Brazilian bands that actually are becoming famous internationally, like CSS, maybe someone has heard of them. It's a band from São Paulo. They are a product of this website. So the new scene of Brazilian music is actually emerging, not from the traditional industry, but from websites like this. If you take a look about audiovisual culture, you have YouTube. I don't have to say anything about YouTube, so I won't. But you have also the Brazilian version of YouTube, which is this website called Videolog. If you talk with the guys from Videolog, they will say that they came up with the idea and with the technology much before YouTube did. But the interesting thing is, I think they haven't told anyone. They should have told the right people in time. But this website is pretty successful in Brazil. It competes with YouTube, and it's interesting to see, for instance, how urban cultures like skateboarders or people who practice le parkour, the French build climbing sports, actually prefer to put their videos at Videolog rather than putting them at YouTube. They much prefer to put them here, so that Videolog has a special attraction to certain urban cultures in Brazil that YouTube doesn't have, for instance. If you take a look in pictures, you have a website like Flickr, and you have in Brazil a counterpart, which is this website called 8p.com.br. It's actually the initiative of Globo, which is probably the largest traditional media group. It's a television broadcaster group, and they have this new enterprise, which is 8p.com.br. And if you have citizenship journalism, like you have in sites like Newsvine, which is this one, American website, in Brazil you also have that with websites like Overmundo, which is actually a website in which I participated in the building and projecting of the website. And I'll get back to Overmundo a little bit later, but it's an example of decentralized journalism that is taking place in Brazil about culture. And in terms of books, nowadays the journal that is most quoted worldwide is this one that is called PLOS, Public Library of Sciences. It's the most quoted news scientific journal worldwide, and it's completely licensed in Creative Commons. So it gives you a new form of distributing scientific materials. And also this model gets to Brazil throughout initiatives like this that is called Cielo. It's a portal for academic journals taking place throughout not only Latin America, but especially Brazil. And everything is published online for free. Anyone can download it. So my point with all these examples is that the collaborative production, the new models, also get to developing countries and also get to Brazil. And this is a few examples of that. But the interesting thing about this is that at the same time that these websites were being created, the Brazilian law was being changed. So in 1998, when all these possibilities started to emerge, the Brazilian law was changed, the Brazilian copyright law was changed. And the results of those changes was to transform the Brazilian law into something more strict, something stricter than it was before. It's part of this global tendency of actually maximizing intellectual property protection without asking further questions. You just go there and you change the law, but without a proper assessment of impact, without a proper empirical basis. So what happens in Brazil is the following. I will make a few questions about the Brazilian copyright law, and in approximately 1 minute, you'll be able to understand everything about the Brazilian copyright law that you have to understand. So let's see if that works. So if I am in Brazil right now, and I want to include an MP3 of the famous Brazilian singer Caetano Veloso in a podcast, is that allowed under the Brazilian copyright law? And the answer will be no. If I am in Brazil and I want to include an MP3 of Caetano Veloso in a webcast, is it possible under the Brazilian law? Does it allow you to do that without going through all the permission channels? And the answer will be no. If I am in Brazil and I want to include a song by another famous Brazilian singer, which is Chico Buarque, in a domestic video, can I use Chico Buarque as the soundtrack for a domestic video? The answer will be no. And if I ask, can I put a song in my weblog? Now you have this entire MP3 blogs phenomenon. Is it legal? Is it possible to include a song in an MP3 blog under the Brazilian law? The answer will be again, no. Then things get really dramatic. If you make the following question, can I make a copy of a book or a chapter of a book under Brazilian law? Can I use it for educational purposes, scientific purposes? Is it allowed under Brazilian law to do a copy of a chapter of a book, for instance? And the answer will be no. And more dramatic yet, what if I go to a store and I buy a CD from Metallica, the American heavy metal band, and I want to copy that CD to my MP3 player, for instance, to my iPod? Can I do it? Like I went to the store, I bought the CD, and I want to copy it to my MP3 player. Is it legal under Brazilian law? And the answer will be no. The way the Brazilian law is drafted does not allow you to transfer the songs from one CD to your MP3 player. That's how the law has been changed. So the final question, actually the two final questions. The first one is, can I remix a song by Minister of Culture of Brazil, Gilberto Gil, if the song is not licensed under a Creative Commons license? No, remix is also not allowed. And the final question is there a right of private copy, or is there the idea of fair use under the Brazilian law? And the answer to that is also no. So the consequence of this, the natural consequence, is tension has grown. You have a big tension between the new models of producing content that rely pretty much on exceptions and limitations to copyright law, and the traditional models. And this tension, of course, led to what is being happening everywhere else, which is lawsuits. So the same people, the same way that people are being sued in the United States for file sharing, you have it to some extent also happening in Brazil. There was a recent IIPA report in which they describe the lawsuits that are being brought in Brazil. But more dramatic than that, the most important reason for lawsuits that took place in Brazil is actually the copying of books. So students were actually sued, and universities were actually being sued in Brazil. I'm a professor of law at FGV, it's Fundação Getúlio Vargas, one very important and traditional business, economics, and law school in Brazil. And FGV was sued by the publishers because FGV was apparently complying or doing nothing about the fact that students were actually making copies of chapters of book to study. So that's how dramatic the situation got in the country, in which students and professors and universities started being sued because of copying a chapter of a book. But this tension between what is legal and what is illegal is actually a symptom of something more profound that is going on. So this thing is, how do we go from now on with this collaborative production of culture? Is it good? Is it bad? Should it be fostered? Should it be reprimanded? So these are the questions, and they are political questions that we are facing right now. So if you take a look at these questions, the question should be as follows. So what do we do? How do we, from the legal terms, solve the problem of the collaborative culture? If the law does not allow you to do anything, so what will allow you to do usages of content so that you can produce culture collaboratively? And one of the answers to this question is the idea of legal commons. So we're talking here about the Creative Commons. What is the idea of legal commons? Legal commons, the way I want to put it, will be whenever the law, whenever the legal system allows you to actually use the works. So that's the idea of commons. It's works that permission is not necessary for them to be used. One example of the legal commons is the works that are in the public domain. So no one has to ask permission if I want to remix the works of a composer that has died for several years, and his works are in the public domain under the national law. So public domain works, you do not have to ask for permission. The second type of works that can be used is the permissions that the law grants to you yourself. So that's the idea of fair use, for instance, which we don't have in Brazil, and many other countries are actually changing their laws, suppressing the fair use rights as well. So fair use can be seen as a sort of a legal permission that the law gives you so that you don't have to ask for the authorization of the authors in order to use the works. That's another sort of commons. You have to consider that these are authorized uses by law that can be considered also part of the commons. Finally, you have the use of licenses, like people actively saying, well, I have my work, but I let you use my work. I'm licensing my work so that you know that you can do certain uses about it. And that's, for instance, the role of the GNU FDL license, or that's the role of the Creative Commons. Creative Commons is nothing less but a license by means of which you let other people know what you can and what you cannot do with your work under legal terms. So Creative Commons is a legal form of creating new commons by means of the voluntary licensing on the part of the authors. So that's also help to create this body of works in which you don't have to get permission to use them. And there are other strategies as well, but I'm not going to extend myself too much to cover them. What I would like to call your attention to the idea of legal commons is that this is not the only sort of commons that we have to consider from now on. And basically, that leads me to the most important chapter of my presentation, which is the idea of something else that is taking place in parallel to the idea of legal commons. And this is what I call the idea of a social commons. So, what is this idea of social commons? This is pretty much inspired by the research that was made by a Portuguese professor in the 70s. His name is Boaventura de Souza Santos, in which he investigated the way that real estate property was being actually dealt with in places where the legal system was simply not available. So that was what this particular Portuguese professor was doing in the 70s. But for the purposes of a general understanding of what a social commons should be considered, a social commons will arise whenever intellectual property is either unknown, people don't know about intellectual property, or not enforced. People actually know about intellectual property, but for one reason or the other, intellectual property is not being enforced in those circumstances, and or intellectual property is irrelevant. So you have like a large portion of the world in which intellectual property is either unknown, not enforced, or simply irrelevant to what's going on. So that's the idea of a social commons emerging. To give you an example, this is a very familiar debate from the perspective of the developing countries. This is the very old debate about formality versus informality. Like, how do you do business formally? How do you do business informally? It might be familiar to you as well, but it's a very familiar discussion for us in Brazil. But then, with the idea of a social commons in mind, I would like to call your attention to the really important part of my presentation, which is the fact that something new is emerging out of the places in which you have a social commons. Something new and something that is really, really important. And it's happening not only in Brazil, but it's happening also everywhere else. So I'll give you a few examples. And this something new that I'm talking about is the fact that the global peripheries are actually appropriating technology in order to build their own cultural industries. So what we are seeing right now, as of 2008, is the fact that in a lot of places in the world, sometimes really poor places, sometimes places that you wouldn't expect this to happen, these global peripheries are using technology, using technological tools in order to create their own culture and their own cultural industries. So to give you an example in terms of music, I would like to call your attention to a research that we have done for more than 2 years in the state of Pará, in the north of Brazil, about this musical scene called Tecnobrega. Tecnobrega, if you are Portuguese, if you understand Portuguese, techno means, well, techno. Brega means cheesy. It means tacky. It means bad taste sometimes. So this is a sort of a techno-cheesy scene, which is the mix between somehow the 80s beats, electronic beats, you know, like Kraftwerk and what came after Kraftwerk, with very melodic, romantic, cheesy music. And it's an extremely successful musical scene in the north of Brazil. It's very good for dancing together, actually. People go to the parties and they dance together with one another, so it's fantastic. The interesting thing about the Tecnobrega is that Tecnobrega is releasing more than 400 CDs per year, and actually more than 100 DVDs per year. This is a flourishing music business that contrasts heavily with the traditional music industry, for instance, from Sony BMG. So the question should be, so how do they make money? That's a complex question, I'll come back to it, but basically they make money throughout parties. Parties like this one, the so-called sound system parties, in Portuguese we say festas de aparelhagem, and as you can see, this is a heavily intensive technological usage going on. Like the Tecnobrega parties, in spite of the fact that they take place in the poorest areas of the city of Belém, they are very intense in terms of how they use technology. So this is one of the parties. Here you can see the audience in one of the Tecnobrega parties as well. Here you can see someone doing the symbol of Super Pop S, which is the name of one of the sound systems. There are others. There's the T of Tupinambá, which is another sound system party. There's the P of Príncipe Negro, and so it goes. I can stay here for the whole night telling you the names of these sound systems. And this is a very important moment in the party, which is the moment in which the sound system comes from the sky. One of the interesting things about the Tecnobrega parties is that there is a cult of technology, and actually the sound systems compete among themselves about who has the most updated, the most sophisticated equipment. And once in a year, there is a moment in which they buy the new equipment, and the equipment actually comes down from the sky, people clap and go crazy, and that's precisely the moment in which the new sound system comes to the parties. This is the DJs of Tecnobrega, and the most important thing, this is the place where the Tecnobrega CDs are sold. I told you that Tecnobrega is releasing more than 400 CDs a year. But if you go to a store, you won't find any Tecnobrega CDs. Because what is happening in the Tecnobrega market is an alliance between the music producers, the musicians, the artists, and the street vendors. So what the musicians have realized is that it's a better deal for them to actually deliver the music to the street vendors and let the street vendors distribute it freely than keep their music through the traditional channels, because they actually make more money by this partnership and this alliance rather than otherwise. So to give you a description, very brief one, because we have like more than 600 pages of research about this. We are actually translating them into English, so you'll be able to read everything online very soon. So to give you an overview of how this market works, everything starts with the bands, the DJs, and the composers. So these guys, they go to a recording studio. The recording studio is generally in the house of someone, because these equipments now are very cheap. So you have the studio at home, and you pay the studio a very low price in order to record your songs. So what you do with your songs is that you get these songs and you give them to the street vendors and to these informal distributors for free. You do not expect any money to come out from this distribution. And what happens later is that the public buys the CDs from the street vendors. They get to know the artists by this process, and then they actually go and pay the concert halls and the sound system parties, which in turn pay the artists. So the revenue goes like that. You have the public paying the concert halls, the sound system companies, and then they pay the bands, DJs, and composers. One thing that we realized is that this is a leveraged market in economic terms. You have an element here which is the party funder. He's a sort of the capitalist of the system, so he actually loans money to the sound system company so that they can buy new equipment, or he's a partner, an equity partner of the sound system company. So it's a very interesting, leveraged, informal market, very sophisticated in terms of economic arrangements. And the one thing that we found out that was really, really important is the fact that the CDs also buy, the public also buy CDs directly from the bands and the composers. But they do it at the concerts. So you go to a concert and you buy a CD after you've seen the concert. You go to a concert and you buy a DVD. And the interesting thing is that these two markets, the street vendor market and the CDs being sold at the concerts, they do not compete with each other. So the CDs that you find in the streets, they are very cheap and low price. They come in a plastic bag. While the CDs that you buy at the concerts, they come with graphic materials, sometimes with the lyrics, pictures of the artist, and for that they are actually more expensive. And we measured how many CDs are being sold by the artists in average in each concert, and it gets to a couple thousand per month. So they are selling a lot of CDs and a lot of DVDs, in spite of the fact that you can go to a street vendor and buy the CDs for a cheaper price in a plastic bag. So that's the one interesting thing. One market actually does not compete with the other. The other most important thing is that we did a research through which Datafolha and an advertising agency which is called Finasca, which is a branch of Saatchi and Saatchi from London. And we asked the Brazilians in the entire country, this is a very large sample, from all regions, all economic classes in the country, we asked a very simple question. We asked them, what is the artist that you are listening to right now? We wanted to get like the popularity of what is popular in Brazil in that given moment. And to our surprise, the number one artist in Brazil, which is Banda Calypso, is a product of this scene. So the most important artist in Brazil, the most famous one, is not a product of the industry, the music industry. They don't even have any sort of contract with the music industry. They are using this informal network of distributors, and throughout this informal network, they became the number one most popular artist in the country. The funny thing is actually that if you take a look at the top 10, 3 other artists are in the same situation. So it's not only the number one, but it's also, you have Calcinha Preta, which is a band of forró. It's another different style. Then you have Amado Batista, which does not have a record label also anymore. And you have also Aviões do Forró, which is another artist that uses this very same network in order to distribute their music and are among the top 10 most popular artists that has been researched through this survey. So that means a lot. That means that there is this new market going on, and this market is becoming actually more important than the traditional market that we are used before. Another example that I would like to give you is about the symbolic force of what's going on. So you might have heard about the baile funk, which is a particular style from Rio de Janeiro that comes from the favelas in Rio de Janeiro. The interesting thing about baile funk is that it has become a symbolic cultural force worldwide. So you have artists like MIA, which are pretty much using the funky carioca samples and funky carioca structure in order to build her songs. This is a picture of MIA actually headlining the Reading Festival, possibly one of the largest music festivals worldwide, and she plays funky carioca. If you doubt me, just go to the Wikipedia you will see like I swear it was not me that updated this page, and like you can see that she's using samples and tracks by Daisy Tigrona, which is a funk carioca artist, and you will see things like this. The Observer, the Sunday supplement from The Guardian, a UK newspaper, saying things like Baile Funky might be the most exciting music in the world. Like this is like a headline from The Observer on a Sunday. So you would open the Observer on a Sunday, drinking your tea in London, and you will read about this music that is made in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. So the symbolic impact of baile funk is very important nowadays. Another interesting symptom of this is that famous Paris store called Colette. Colette is a sort of a curated shop. They only sell very few artifacts, but if you buy one of them, you can be sure that you're a really cool person. So it's a curated shop. And the CDs that they sell is less than like 50 CDs at any time. And the CDs cost each 80 euros. Because you're not buying the CD, but you're buying the selection that someone made about that CD. And recently I went to visit Colette, and I was really surprised to see from this selection of 50 CDs, 6 of them were baile funk CDs from Rio de Janeiro that you can actually buy for maybe 50 cents of a dollar in the streets, and they were being sold for 60, 70 euros in this particular store. So it's very striking to see how these things are happening. In terms of movies, another dimension of the research that we did was about something that is going on which is very similar to the Tecnobrega. So I told you that Brazil actually releases 51 films per year, right? The United States releases 611 films per year. What's on top of this? Does anyone know? What's on top of the US numbers of movie production? Bollywood. India. India releases 934 films per year. What's on top of this? Does anyone know?
Lagos.
Huh?
You get Nigeria.
Isaac, who said that? Excellent. Nigeria. Nigeria produces 1,200 films per year. Films like Osofia in London or Osofia in London Part 2. So basically, this is all films are made directly to DVD. Just like the Tecnobrega market, they are marketed in the streets by the street vendors. And it's very interesting because what happened is Nigeria releases 30 new titles per week. So every Monday, they release 30 new films. The films are all shot in digital video and high definition digital video. One single film costs from $30,000 to $100,000 to produce, so that's not much, but that's not also trivial. Nigeria has 0 movie theaters. That's one of the interesting things. And one film costs $3 to be bought in the streets, or you can also rent the films for 50 cents of a dollar. And that's the interesting thing. Nigeria generates $200 million in revenues by selling these films, making the Nigeria production the 3rd largest in the world. So you have the United States up there, then you have India, and then you have Nigeria generating $200 million per year with movies, without any support of the government, without any support of any formal bureaucratic entity. This is a bottom-up phenomenon in which a very decentralized market has emerged, with like many producing companies actually competing with each other and generating a lot of money. And the most striking thing, the Nigerian cinema generates 1 million employments per year. 1 million employments, making the Nigerian film scene the 2nd source of employment in Nigeria. Number 1 is agriculture, number 2 is cinema, and then you have oil. So Nigeria employs more people with cinema than it employs with oil. I told this story to a very famous Brazilian filmmaker. He's an internationally famous filmmaker. And he told me something like this. He said, Ronaldo, but this is not cinema. This is something else. This is another thing. Like a cinema is when you go to the screen and you have the popcorn. This is not cinema. And then I was intrigued by his comment, and I found an article by Henri Langlois, who is the founder of the French Cinémathèque, and he wrote in 1969 that the true cinema would only emerge when these peripheries would be able to use the means of production of cinema and be able to tell their own stories, which is pretty much what happens in Nigeria. The themes of the Nigerian films are very much connected to the life in Nigeria, to the reality of Nigeria, and that's why they are so much appealing. So I got this text by Henri Langlois, and I sent to this very famous Brazilian director, and he never got back to me, so I don't know what he really thinks about this. All this research was made under a project that is called Open Business Project. We actually researched not only Brazil. Brazil was certainly the country in which we researched the most, but we researched also Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, and already mentioned Nigeria. And in all the countries, the same thing is happening. So this is not something that is particular to Brazil or Nigeria, but it's happening everywhere. And so my point is that this is a phenomenon taking place in these global peripheries. And the important thing is that this idea of periphery is not rich or poor, or north and the south. That's nothing to do with it. Because what I call a global periphery is also what is going on in London with the mixtape markets, or it's going on with the dubstep scene in London as well, or the New York hip-hop scene. It operates by the same rules of what I've been describing here. The hip-hop scene in Baltimore in the United States is just the same thing. So this phenomenon is not something that has to do with North or the South, with the poor, with the rich. It's happening everywhere. It's even happening when you think about the debate about formality and informality. It's also happening, for instance, with YouTube, in which YouTube is a big social commons space, because intellectual property is not being enforced in YouTube, because it was being enforced at YouTube, YouTube would simply be not able to exist. So I'm writing this article with a Brazilian anthropologist that is called Hermano Viana about what we call this globalization of informality. Because what's going on now is that digital technology is actually exporting this debate about formality, informality, legality, informality to everywhere. So this used to be a problem for the developing countries, and now it's becoming a problem for everyone, even for YouTube or the P2P networks or Pirate Bay or BitTorrent. Anyone in the networks are having to deal with this problem of intellectual property, its enforceability, or its lack of enforceability. Okay, so time to finish. I'd just like to say very quickly that one thing that is important is how culture has a different meaning in a developing country than it has, for instance, in a developed country. And, for instance, in the United States, if you take a look at the majority of Web 2.0 websites, they're all about technology itself. So you have Slashdot. What do you talk about in Slashdot? You talk about technology. You have Digg. Digg originated as a website so that we could talk about technology. And in Brazil, websites like Overmundo and other initiatives like Trama Virtual that are really working in terms of a free, collaborative dissemination of knowledge, they don't talk about technology. Technology is merely a tool. You actually talk about something else, and this something else is culture. So that's an important difference about how technology has a different meaning in a country like Brazil, rather than it has, for instance, in the United States, in which technology is not only the tool, but also the subject matter through which you use that tool. And just to finish by saying that we are very happy that Overmundo received the Prize Ars Electronica in 2007 in Austria, and it's the first time that a Brazilian website ever received a prize like this. So for Brazil, I think this is very meaningful, that a website that is free software and based on open and free technology actually received a prize like this. That's it. Thank you very much.
Hey, Ronaldo, thanks so much.
Sorry, I have Tecnobrega music to show here, if you want to listen to 2 tracks.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I was forgetting the most important part of my presentation. So, prepare yourselves. You can start dancing together if you want, okay? So, really quickly. No, it's okay. Just to give you a little background about the style, this is a very innovative music scene, in the sense that, let me just, don't worry, in the sense that the music evolves very quickly. It started with a very melodic, the cheesy side started very strong, and then the cheesy side was being put away, and it became like more and more sophisticated. So if you go back to Belém, every 6 months, you will find a completely different musical scene. I will show you a track from the beginnings of the Tecnobrega, and then I'll show you a track from nowadays, so that you can see how the music is evolving. This is the track from the beginning of the Tecnobrega scene. So, 1 second. Okay. Okay, so this is a track from the very early versions of Tecnobrega. The entire music production is made electronically. Not because it's good, but it's also because it's cheap. It's an economic decision. Technology is cheaper than buying like a drum kit or buying a guitar or anything like that. So you use technology to produce the music because it's cheap. It's just like the hip hop in the 70s. Like the black communities started to use pitchforks and like tables to do music because it was cheaper. The same reason. Okay, I'll put the second track. And this is a more recent development of the scene. This is being called electromelody. Electromelody. It's a very contemporary. It's a track from 1 month ago.
final de semana. Hoje eu vou sair com G, com a minha alucinada. Vou curtir é o Rubi, passageiros da nave já chegou e dando show. E tu já tu sabe que o Rubi é meu amor. Eu sou do Rubi, eu sou da Marabáia. Faz a pedra aí, moçada. É o fogo poderoso que chegou pra agitar. E aí, DJ, já vamos decolar. Já curtidas passou na bicha, dançaram no portal. Sou mais de 5 anos de sucesso na moral. Passageiros da nave, tô fazendo a projeção. Se é bem no céu, é Rubi no coração. Rubi no coração.
Okay, that's it.